Hi, this is Dan Olds hosting another call for a student cluster competition. And what we're doing today is asking the question, so you want to be an SCC advisor. And this call is designed to help all of you budding student cluster competition competitors, primarily advisors, give you some idea on how to put together your teams, how to get budget, how to get sponsors, all of that. And we're talking to some people that have some really deep experience in this. And I'm going to introduce them in turn. Let's start with you, Rebecca. It's Rebecca Hartman Baker. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks, Dan. So my name is Rebecca Hartman Baker. I work at NERSC. I spent 2.5 years working at the Pawsey Supercomputing Center in Australia, where I had 2 teams that I coached to the student cluster competitions at SC13 and SC14. Today I am on the student cluster competition committee.
Excellent. We also have out there Doug Smith. Doug?
My name is Doug Smith. I'm with the University of Colorado Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics. I have put together teams for 8 of the past 9 SC competitions, as well as the international supercomputing competitions.
You've been down the road with this competition. We also have from Texas, John Kaz and Carlos Rosales Fernandez. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm John Kaz. I work at the Texas Advanced Computing Center at the University of Texas. I'm in charge of part of the HPC applications group. I've been involved in coaching teams for the past 5 years. Not always the lead advisor, but always involved.
It's including a team that's done quite well. The first three-peat in student cluster competition history.
That's true.
Had to get that in. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, so like John, I work in the Texas Advanced Computing Center at the University of Texas at Austin, and also part of the High Performance Computing Group. And I've been involved with either coaching directly or supporting the team from the University of Texas at Austin since 2010.
Excellent. And last but not least, we have Stephen Harrell, who's from Purdue and has been quite involved in it, as he'll tell you, but he's also the chairperson for the competition this year. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So in addition to what I work for Purdue University in research computing, but in addition to me being the chair this year, I've taken teams to 7 different competitions, including the ISC as well as ASC. So I have a little bit of experience in this.
And you're heading up the effort this year in putting together the competition.
Absolutely.
First of all, just to throw a question out to you guys, what does the institution get from participating in this, and what do the students get out of it?
Well, I think they get fame and fortune. That's what I always tell people anyway.
Sure, the lust for glory.
Yeah. So from the Australian perspective, right, we were in the most isolated city in the world, Perth, Western Australia, and nobody had ever heard of us. So this was a really great way for us to go out there and say, hey, look, we are a supercomputing power, and we have all these awesome students who can do all this great stuff.
What about you guys at TAC? What are your students getting out of it, and what's the institution get out of it?
The students, for most of the students we've worked with, what they've appreciated, I think, most about this competition is hands-on experience with the hardware. Mm-hmm. Decisions in building the hardware, installing the system. Many of the students who've been in this competition with us have been in many coding competitions, and they like this because it's quite different. Mm. And so what does TAC get out of it, or the University of Texas?
Both.
Well, for the University of Texas, maybe a little bit of the prestige at being at supercomputing and competing. At TAC, it's sort of a pipeline to some really good students who have worked here at TAC and done internships over the years. Mm. So it's good for us.
And for the students, of course, it's getting those internships and getting full-time jobs out of it, too.
Yeah, but I would say that a lot of it is not so much getting internships. I mean, some of the students we get already have internships lined up even before they meet us, right? But what they gain is something that they never get in school through a formal course, They learn real life, how does a cluster work, how do I maintain and operate a cluster, not a toy, but a real cluster. And that's something that is very valuable and gives them a very different perspective from when they will see in the classes.
How about you, Doug? What do you think?
The students here at TU they get exposure to scientific computing and HPC. We try to pull students from not just the engineering college, but from science disciplines, the bioengineering folks, the genomics. So they get exposure to the computing side. My CS students get exposure to networking opportunities at an event like SC, potential career opportunities. We've had, just like Texas, we've had a lot of our students go on to create a career in HPC, specifically from this competition.
And I know you've seen some of the same things at Purdue, right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our students get a lot out of it just having the hands-on experience. And when I think of the competition, I don't think of it in necessarily a depth of experience, but in a breadth of experience. They're going to experience a lot of things at the competition that they haven't experienced before, including the hands-on with the hardware, but also the HPC community as a whole. So I think that's pretty important. The other thing that Purdue gets out of it is just giving these students experience. We have a lot of programs that point to experiential learning, and my kind of small group at Purdue, Research Computing, we actually hire quite a few of our students, and we have, I think we've hired at least 5 or 6 students that have gone through the programs to, we're a little bit like Pawsey. No one really wants to live in Indiana. You just kind of happen to. So finding students and convincing them to stay here is important to keeping our HPC Center healthy.
But like they say, Indiana is the thinking man's Iowa.
That's right. It sure is.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what comes first. Do you find a team first, or do you find a sponsor first? Or get administration buy-in?
So I think first you really have to get administration buy-in. So what I did was I knew I wanted to have a team, so I took my boss over to the student cluster competition at SC12, and then he found out for himself how awesome it was. And then he said, gee, we should have a team. And I was like, yeah, I know, we should. So I think that's the first step.
So not a huge sales job in your case.
No, not a huge sales job.
What about you other guys?
Our first team actually came to us and asked us to help them compete. Although I agree with Rebecca. I mean, before you can go very far, you really need to get administration buy-in because you'd hate to form a team and then find out you have no support.
That makes sense. What about you, Doug? You put together, 9 or 10 teams. How did it start back in the early days?
In the early days, wow, I sound old. In 2006, I came back from SC, and I sort of just grassroots put out a bunch of advertisements to the student body to see if there was interest, and there turned out to be a significant amount of interest. And then we went to sponsors, and then we went to administration. The administration's always been very supportive of us. The first 4 or 5 years, we were completely self-funded. So we went out and we sought sponsorship both financially and from hardware and software vendors. And so it looked very nice to my administration because we were very low cost. And that was kind of a key driver for us. Now we've been able to show value to the university in our students either returning to go to grad school or getting jobs immediately after graduation, and not jobs where they're there for a year and it's a stepping stone to something better, but jobs that they graduated at a year, 2, 3, 4 years, and they're still there today. And the university really likes to see that. So that's kind of been our experience. We've been very grassroots even up till now. We have toyed with offering 4-credit type engagements and classes, but we've primarily stood clear of that, and we've been able to pipeline students fairly well. I mean, we routinely have 10 to 15 students year after year.
That's great. So it doesn't sound to me like anybody has any problem attracting students to the program. Is that correct?
I've had problems before. A lot of the problems end up when I think year to year. I think it's pretty easy to create some interest, but it's good to have backups, let's say.
Sure.
Because undergraduates' lives are very dynamic, and that can affect their commitment to going to the competition.
Sure. What with the Instagram and Facebook and all,
That's right.
they've got a full life.
Well, the competition also occurs during finals for many of the students, so
That's a
some
good
years
point.
it's been hard for us to get a good team together. Yeah.
And it's also a sustained 6 to 9 month effort as well, right?
Yeah, the commitment is pretty strong.
Yeah. So let's say you have your team together, you have your institution is bought off on this. How do you go about getting a sponsor? Who should you target? How's that work?
So we targeted the vendors that provide us with supercomputers.
Yeah.
So we had good connections with Cray and SGI because they were providers of machines for our facility, and SGI was the first one to raise their hand and say, yes, we want to sponsor the team.
Was it pretty smooth working with them?
Yeah, it was. They gave us their best system engineer in the Asia Pacific region to help the team, and he was really awesome. So if he's not their best, then that'd be fantastic for them to have such a great team of people. So yeah, he helped our team to basically pick out from a list of parts what parts they wanted to put together to make their cluster.
Yeah, very good. How about your other experiences, folks?
No, I was just going to say that we had a fairly similar experience. We reached out to the vendors that we are familiar with and that we work mostly, and they've typically been pretty open to supporting the team, usually with, loaner systems and things like this.
Yeah, primarily hardware.
But exactly, like John says, primarily hardware. Getting cash
Sure.
from anybody is actually very hard.
Yeah, but do you guys think that the competitions have gotten to the point in stature that the hardware vendors get it and they see the benefits of being involved?
I keep seeing a lot of new hardware vendors who want to get involved, which is really great. I think each year we see some maybe some people that we've seen before in terms of vendors, but also I think we see typically a few new ones that are either new to the field or new to the competition.
Yeah,
So
I love seeing that.
Yeah, it's great, and I think those people definitely see the importance of the competition. So if you know somebody like that, I feel like that's a good place to target because they see a lot of if they're not already spending $500 million on marketing, that stuff can be really important. But if you talk about some of the maybe not $500 million, but if you talk about some of the big people, big companies, they have tremendously large departments to get their name out there.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you can often get commitments within specific deals or just in general from people that you work with and it's often I feel like the small vendors that are really hungry and see the true benefit of it.
I would have to agree with that. I mean, I'm looking at, for instance, a company called Silicon Mechanics, which isn't huge by any means. They're a VAR located in Seattle, but they've sponsored a team from Boston for 3 or 4 years running.
Sure.
And did a great job of it. Also seeing along the lines of new vendors like some of the liquid cooling vendors like Cool IT has been more than happy to help out.
So if there's any vendors listening, please, we can help you connect with teams. And if any teams are having problems with vendors, we often get vendors that want to sponsor a team but don't have anyone specific in mind.
Well,
so please email the committee for the cluster competition, and we can help make those connections.
Would you say we're at the point that if someone has a team together, credible effort, that we could find a sponsor for them one way or another?
We can make the connections, right? I think they have to do, maybe the things that's not being said is that every single person on this call has had to do some sort of negotiation, or their administration has, in order to get their sponsorships and have the vendors agree to give them the hardware. So, I think that's something that has to be done at the institutional level, and it's not something that the committee can really do beyond saying, here's two interested parties, you guys should talk.
And let's level set this too, because we're talking about, I don't know, a couple $100,000 worth of equipment here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, on the high end, but I think $100,000 is probably, par for the course.
Well, we're talking 6 to 10 nodes, dual processor nodes, probably some accelerators. Usually you've got, Mellanox has been great in supporting people with I/O and interconnect, but it does add up.
Absolutely.
But it's not out of reach of most hardware vendors.
Yeah, I would agree.
I was just going to say, usually they just lend it to you, too, so it's not like they're really giving up $100,000 worth of equipment. They're just letting you borrow it.
Yes, they're not giving it away. That all goes back. Actually, it's interesting. One of the company I referred to earlier, Silicon Mechanics, would give away a copy of whatever system they'd given to the students. They would sort of not auction it off, but they would have a grant writing competition and give it to the winning grant writer for a nonprofit. So that was kind of neat, and that's great publicity. So let's say you have your hardware sponsor, you've got your team in place. How do you get the financial support, and what do you need for financial support?
So for my team, because we were out in the middle of nowhere, literally.
That's your own fault. You have no one to blame but yourself, Rebecca.
Yeah, right. Well, those kids anyway, they grew up there. So we budgeted $3,000 per student just for flights, and that was about right for us. Mm-hmm. And then I guess different competitions are different, but the competition at SC, they would cover the team's lodging and registration. So really, they just needed some spending money maybe for buying souvenirs, and then they needed this huge plane ticket.
Sure.
And so that was tough to get about $18,000.
That's a big
number.
We
had. Yeah, it's a big number. Yeah, there's a lot of zeros. And so the first year, SGI actually sponsored the team partially and gave us a good chunk of money to pay for half of the team. And then in Western Australia, the biggest industry is digging up the ground and sending it to China or other countries.
Which I think we would call mining, wouldn't we?
That's what most people call it, yeah. So there were a lot of big mining companies, so we solicited from the mining companies. And so that first year we were successful in that. The second year we had a little harder time. The first year it's always easy, it's always exciting, people want to get involved. Second year it's a little harder. We were able to make a connection through one of the applications. So one of the applications was for shallow water modeling circulation of for example, harbors and bays mm-hmm. and things like that. Mm-hmm. And we actually were working with a company who was using our computers to do that type of modeling.
Ah.
So we said, hey, why don't you sponsor our team and give us some money for at least one of our students to go? And maybe if you have somebody who knows something about this code, you could help us too. So yeah, as it turned out, it worked out really well. They had somebody who had used that code before. They don't use it themselves in their, they have their own proprietary product that they use for their simulations, but they were familiar with it, and so this person actually came and helped my student to learn how to use this code and how to run it and what it means. And then my student actually ended up getting an internship at that company afterwards. So
Oh,
yeah.
it all
So
worked out then.
yeah, it was a fantastic relationship. And they gave us enough money to sponsor one student.
Steve and Doug, what do you guys think about how do you tin cup your way into these competitions as an institution?
Well, I think Rebecca hit on part of it. Is there are a lot of users of HPC out there, companies that use HPC. So I would encourage other people who are interested in being an advisor to think outside the box a little bit and look at the companies out there that use this technology. And we've done the same thing, a similar case to Rebecca's, where Lockheed Martin gave us some huge financial support in the past and actually hired some of our students because they're an HPC, they're an organization that uses HPC.
Mm.
Same thing for Intel and Google. They've provided support in the past, and because they see the value of a potential talent pool there.
Sure. How about you, Steve?
So, we kind of do a little bit of both. I mean, well, actually, we've done it three ways. One is the way that Doug was saying for kind of external companies, HPC users, you might consider them. And so we've had a few companies sponsor us in that way. Oftentimes we can get a little bit of money from the vendors, not typically everything, but, we definitely ask. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And then I think the third place is, we look to our organizations. My organization is in central IT. So, I write pleas to the deans of the colleges of the students that may be participating. And just ask them what they have available. Purdue, in particular, has a few, in specific colleges, there's a few programs for, things like undergraduate research or experiential learning and things like that, and we're able to get some of that money as well. So those are the three ways that we've been able to do it at Purdue.
Great. So now we have the teams, we have the money, we've got the institutional support. How do you train them? What's the timeline like? What goes into doing this? You want to start this out, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. So in Australia, the school year actually goes from it follows the calendar year. I know it's crazy, but it's because the seasons are off by 6 months. So you start in the fall, which is spring in the northern hemisphere. It was kind of weird at first. So anyway, I was able to simply just meet with the students once a week for an afternoon during the entire first and second semesters of school. And in fact, the competition was during their finals week, so they kind of liked that because then they got to put off their finals for a little later. And it worked out really well. So we didn't have to worry about summer break and what people were doing in their summer internships or whatever, because it wasn't summer, it was winter. And so some of the students got like credit for this. So in Australia, a bachelor's degree is typically 3 years, and in the fourth year you spend doing your honors thesis.
Okay.
So they were able to incorporate it into their honors thesis, or they were able to get credit for it in their computational physics lab, or some of them just did it out of the kindness of their hearts because they were just really interested.
So, John and Carlos, I know that given what the teams from Texas have done, you guys must have, a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week immersive training into HPC, massages and masseuses all over the place, a lot of sports medicine going on, perhaps some illegally banned substances, who knows? So what's the training like for the...
No.
No?
No.
No, we typically start having meetings maybe every couple of weeks, give them access to some of the systems here so that they start getting familiar with things. Over the summer, most of the students have internships that are outside of Austin, so we try to keep in touch by doing bi-weekly or, if needed, weekly remote meetings.
Yeah.
And that's worked pretty well. Once we get to the end of the summer, Then we start meeting weekly, and towards the end, it's often multiple times a week.
Right. Once we receive our actual hardware, then we usually spend like a full day for maybe 3 weekends in a row just working on the hardware, assembling the hardware, making sure the students can build the hardware, shoot the hardware, set it up themselves. I mean, that's our primary rule is you should know how to do all of this yourself.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the competition, you should not have to rely on us, the advisors, to do any of this for you.
And we try to be accommodating because at that time of the year, we are busy, but they're busy too. So we spend lots of weekends and nights in the machine room with them.
Sure. And what's the experience level of the kids as they come in to this?
That's extremely varied. So to give you an idea, we participated for the first time in 2010, and we got the highest HPL number that year. I don't think anyone in the team knew what Linux was. Nobody.
No
Obviously,
kidding.
when they started. There were two that knew what it was, but because they had been volunteers in SC the year before, student volunteers, but they had never used it. So, it's perfectly possible to bring them up from a very basic level to being able to do things reasonably well. It just takes longer.
And that's something all of you budding advisors ought to really take note of. And I think that Doug and Steve will say the same thing, is that you don't have to have highly tuned, highly trained HPC undergrads going into this, right, guys?
No.
Yeah.
No, one thing I would say is that it definitely helps if you have one or two, and what we've done in the past is students that participated in the competition with us, we've asked them to come back and help us train the next generation.
Some of your
In a sense.
40-year-old
That's
ringers.
Yep.
No, they're not using ringers. But Steve and Doug, you guys have had some pretty inexperienced folks on some of your teams at times.
Yeah, we've at CU we've had all different levels. Like I said, we actively recruit from anybody who has any interest. Right? You don't have to be an engineering or a physics major or anything like that. We've had anthropology majors that have competed on the team who just have a high degree of interest. And we've brought people from relatively no knowledge of HPC up to a position where they're able to build a small cluster. It takes time and it takes patience, but I can certainly agree with what the guys from TAC have said. We get all different levels. It does usually help if you have one or two that have some kind of knowledge, sorts of seeds for students to collect around and learn from peer
Someone
to peer.
who's they've heard the word Linux before, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the thing that I think is most important in a student is desire and drive, like commitment, basically. Mm-hmm. I've seen brilliant students not do anything, and students that start from scratch do things that I was honestly floored about. So I think to me that's the number one quality. And then after that, of course, you can say, well, yeah, sure, we'd like to understand Linux, and we want you to be able to work quickly and all these things. But to me, commitment is the differentiator between a student that does really well and really understands what's happening, and a student that maybe just tags along.
Gotcha. What sort of resources are out there? I don't think that any of you have the time to spend all on your own tutoring these kids. And they, like Steve just pointed out, they need to have some drive and be self-starters. But what kind of resources are out there to help them get up to speed?
I think each institution is going to be a little different. I mean, I can speak from the Purdue perspective. We provide a class. We also have a lot of trainings that we do just generally for our HPC center that can be useful for these types of things. We also have some system administration classes that, although they aren't necessarily HPC centric, they can help jumpstart a student into understanding what's going on. Beyond that, though, I think it depends a lot on students. I mean, I don't know if this is typical across other institutions, but we often just give them tasks and say, okay, ask us questions, right? And so, of course, we give them a little more than that. We'll give them some documentation and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the expectation for us has always been, you not only do you have to be able to do this stuff, you kind of have to be able to learn how to do this stuff on the fly. And I think there's many situations in the competition, especially with the introduction of the mystery apps in the past few years, that it's almost not only do you have to teach specific apps, but you also have to teach them how to find out about the apps, because they're going to have to do it themselves on the floor by themselves.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think we do something very similar here. We point them to our user training. In summer, we run a summer supercomputing institute that lasts for a week, and we try to get as many of them as possible to follow that course. And then we really expect them that as a team, they try to complete certain tasks that we give them as we move closer towards the competition and help them along the way. But for this competition, if they cannot learn how to find out how to solve problems on their own, they're going to be out of the competition pretty quickly, because we're not going to be able to help them.
Yeah, exactly.
Once they're on the floor, they need to be completely independent. So
that's one of the newest trends in the competition too, is that they at least have they're now getting some professional level tools, like from Alinea for performance characterization, that either they didn't know about or didn't use before. And I think that that's going to help bring everybody's level up that much more, make it that much more competitive.
Yeah, and I think there's two things that we've found really successful at Colorado is the fact that in the science disciplines, when you're given a particular application and we ask the students to go out and investigate this science application and find domain experts, as long as you're respectful of their time and you think out your questions, they're more than happy to get into a mentorship type relationship with our students, both from the science domain side and from the vendor hardware and software side. When you find somebody that's enthusiastic about what you do, most people are very enthusiastic about sharing their knowledge about it, and that's been a big help for our students.
Oh yeah, and I've found that from what I've heard anecdotally is that even the folks that have created these applications, they're all open source applications, but even the folks that have created these applications are more than happy to field questions from student teams.
Yeah, I think in the competition, we even have a Google group where the students can ask questions of the application experts that we are providing.
So now that we have our team together, they're motivated, they know the applications, they're learning them, how do they write that proposal to get into the competition? Are there any tips on that?
I actually with John and a few others, we rewrote the rubric for the proposal. So there should be some good documentation out there of exactly what we're looking for.
And that's for SC this year, 2016, because the application process is open.
Yeah, that's correct.
You want to walk us through that a little bit? Or
Yeah,
or is
sure.
that part of them being self-starters? They have to go walk themselves through it.
So I think we make some recommendations about what students should write and what the advisor should write, because I feel like there's a clear difference there. That we have, I think, 4 or 5 major points. Basically, we want you to talk and tell us why your team is good. What their strengths and weaknesses are. We want you to talk about the hardware and software architecture and why you think it's a winner. We want to talk about your vendor relationship, what your vendors promise. What are they going to be helping you, teach the kids and things like that.
Because, and real quick, let me interject this here, that
Sure.
in talking with the founders of the cluster competition, it's not just getting that cluster up and running that's the goal of it. A lot of this is project management, working in a team, putting together a big project with a long time frame.
Absolutely, and I think in vendors really benefit if you can get. You can't always get them to do this, but if you can get them to work with the students directly, I think both the vendors and the students benefit considerably. So that's something that we really want to know. We also want to know how you prepared your students. So do you have a class? Do you just give them tasks? What kinds of things are happening in their preparation? And we also are interested to know, diversity questions. A lot of it, kind of underserved institutions or people that maybe traditionally don't participate in HPC. That type of thing. And then we have just a general overall category, which basically can be summed up as: do we think that your team's going to compete and do well in the competition, right? And so there's a lot more explanation than I just went through on
Sure.
the website, so please check there. But those are the overall categories.
Great.
No, I think it's worth noting the schedule. If you're thinking about doing this as a team advisor, the opening for proposals is usually sometime in February. The proposals are due usually sometime April, May, and then you get notified sometimes late May, and then you have the summer, and then you enter another follow-up proposal after the selections have been made in May, outlining your final competition hardware in the fall, and then you compete in November. So project management, team communication, team collaboration is huge throughout the entire process because, I would tell prospective advisors, you can't start too soon.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree, and I would say that oftentimes new teams are at a disadvantage here because oftentimes people will hear about the call, and maybe a month or 2 months is not sufficient time for them to get started up, and so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, to kind of give people a jump start. I think a lot of people kind of look at this like this is really cool, but man, I have no idea where you even start with this, and I certainly can relate to that. I think starting as soon as possible is really the best way. Once you get into the rhythm of it, as soon as I'm back from winter break, that's when I'm starting to work on this. Typically, when I was an advisor.
So you think, though, that if a team were motivated, they would have time now to get in and get in on this?
Absolutely, and I think if you communicate with the committee about what's going on, right? If you say, in your proposal you put like, we're in talks with our vendor, and we'll send them kind of an addendum or something in this time frame. We can take that type of thing into consideration, and I think that's typically the thing that's hardest. I don't think it's getting students. I think it's getting the organizational commitment as well as the vendor commitment that is kind of required before you send your proposal. So typically with the vendor commitment, what I would do is I would send them an email, say, hey, are you guys interested in doing this? They would say, of course we're interested, right? They always say yes.
Yeah, we're interested in everything. Sure.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we have wide-ranging interests.
So then, I'd send a second email and kind of say, before I submit my proposal, these are the things that we'll need in order to be able to participate. Is this doable for you guys? And almost certainly I'll get a phone call because they want to start talking. They want to start negotiating with me. Then we come to a conclusion of what they can provide and what not, and then that's what I would put into the vendor relationship. And then once you're done with that, once you've submitted and been accepted, then you want to email them and say, hey, you committed to this, ha ha ha.
You committed to it, and we're in. Let's go.
That's right.
Excellent. Well, is there anything you guys can think of that we left out on this? I think we've given prospective advisors and student teams a pretty good roadmap of how to participate. Any closing comments?
I would say if you're thinking about doing this, reach out to. I haven't talked to any advisors who have not been willing to provide advice to other prospective advisors. So reach out to people that have competed in the past. Reach out to Stephen. Be persistent. It's when we first started this at CU, it was totally student-driven, totally grassroots, and we were able to pull it off to a point where now it's sort of self-sustaining. So when you get the proposal announcement, it may look daunting. If you sit down and make a strategy and ping some other people that have been involved, it's totally doable, and I think it's a great experience for your students.
That's great.
Yeah, I would add that in terms of team management, what's helped us in the past is tell the team to please select essentially a team captain that is going to handle a little bit of communication so that we have another level of, hey, remember that you're still responsible for this. And when it's a comment between peers, that seems to work much better than when it comes directly from an advisor. So we've used that in the past to improve communication in the team.
That's a very good idea.
I think my most important advice is that it's really fun, and don't lose sight of that. I mean, it's not really about quote unquote winning the competition.
Exactly.
I mean, we never won it. Maybe that's why I'm saying that, because it's not because we never won. But it's so much fun, and the kids learn so much, and they have a great time. And especially if they come from some totally remote place and they get to, free trip to America, that was like a huge sell for my students anyway.
Well, and that's the other thing is they have the entire supercomputing show there for them as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I don't think they'd ever seen that many people who were interested in the same thing in one place before.
Oh, that's neat. That's great. Well, I want to thank all of you for being on the call here. Really appreciate it, and I know that the soon-to-be student cluster competition advisors out there appreciate it too. Thank you all for joining.